Another major challenge is tax reform. Next week, the House and Senate may meet to settle differences between their respective bills. South Dakota Senator John Thune is one of 8 Republican senators named to the Tax Reform Conference Committee to negotiate the legislation. Senator, good morning. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Nora. Nice to be with you.
Let me first ask you about our new CBS News poll, because it shows that Americans see these tax cuts as overwhelmingly benefiting corporations and the wealthy. In fact, nearly 2/3 of Americans think that corporations won't use the tax cut in order to hire people and create jobs. Do you have assurances from big businesses that they're going to reinvest in workers?
Well, all the analysis that we've seen, Nora, suggests that it may vary how much they put back into the business, how much they pay out and distribute in dividends, or how much they plow into raising wages and benefits. But it's some amount. And if you use 25% or 75%, you get a different number. But all the analysis that has been done suggests that reducing the corporate rate, the business rate, a lot of that money is going to flow back into higher wages. And so we've seen as much as $4,000 per household in this country in terms of the wage impact of lowering the business rates.
Well, you've even suggested to corporations that they could use the tax cut money to give workers a raise. All workers think that's a really great idea, but we've already heard some corporations say, no, they're going to pass it on to the shareholders. Is there anything that can be done? Are you trying to do anything to convince the corporations, this might be a good thing? Well,
of course we'll encourage it, Gail. In a free market economy, obviously they're going to make that decision, but we think that if they distribute it in the form, of dividends to shareholders, that's getting back into the economy. That's going to benefit a lot of pension funds, a lot of retirement funds.
Not better than the workers, though.
But we think a lot of it will go back to workers. I mean, any company that sees their tax burden reduced by that amount is, if they want to grow and expand their operation, going to have to hire more workers. And in a competitive labor market, we think that raises wages for workers in this country.
And clearly, so many of these issues are partisan. One that's not is the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP.
Right.
It has bipartisan approval. There's actually a new paper out this morning, an op-ed in the New York Times from a bipartisan group of governors saying, please save kids' health care. That fund ran out last September. It's expected to run out nationwide by early next year if it's not replenished. 13,000 children alone in your state are affected by this, 9 million in the country as a whole. Why can't Congress at least come together when it comes to providing health care for our youngest?
And we will. I mean, that is something that everybody agrees upon. The CHIP program is actually something that got authorized, I think, my first year in Congress. But it has broad bipartisan support, and my guess is it'll hitch a ride on whatever the year-end spending bill is that we do. As you noted, in my state, for example, the impact isn't going to be felt till early next year, so we got a little bit of a window here, but I think it'll get done in the next couple of weeks.
A lot of worried families out there.
Right.
Let me ask you this, because we did some of the analysis on the median household income in your state of South Dakota, where the average income is about $50,000 a year, right? So that person would pay about 1.4% less in taxes. The wealthiest, though, 1% of South Dakotans would pay nearly 4% less. That's based on the Senate tax plan. So what would you say to the middle-class citizen in South Dakota who says, why are they getting a bigger cut?
Well, if you look at, Nora, that, for example, the Tax Foundation has done an analysis of an average family in my state, and they've shown that the tax cut would be about $2,500 per family. But I just ask people, sit down and look at your own tax circumstances, plug in your numbers into your tax return. If you double the standard deduction, if you double the child tax credit, if you get the benefit of the lower rates, an average family of 4 with a combined annual income of $73,000 a year is going to see a reduction of about $2,200, and that represents a 60% reduction over what they're paying under current law. So everybody's circumstances are going to be different, but if you're on the lower end of the income scale with that doubling of the standard deduction, I think you're going to see a dramatically lower tax bill.
And I get you're trying to simplify the tax code, but what about the people that are losing the deductions that they count on, state and local taxes, medical expenses, the student loan interest? I mean, all of those could really hit people.
Well, there will be fewer itemizers because although many of those deductions that you mentioned are kept in the Senate version of that bill. So if you want to itemize, you can still take charitable, you can still take mortgage interest, you can still take medical expenses above a certain amount. And so those could, if you choose to itemize, you can still take advantage of that. I think where most people are going to experience the benefit is with the reduction in rates. I think you're going to see a real lowering of rates, particularly, if you look at the Senate bill and how that flows through the different income categories. But you know, everybody's tax circumstances are different, and so I just encourage people to sit down and kind of figure out what the impacts are for them and their families.
And then can I address you to address the concerns of adding to the deficit, because they will add to the deficit over $1 trillion, and I know the numbers are not final, but we had Senator Bernie Sanders here yesterday. I know he's on the opposite political spectrum of you. But the point,
Bernie had a different point of view than I did.
Yes, he did.
Surprise. But he's making the case, too, that once these tax cuts go through, that in order to balance the budget, that there will be coming cuts in Medicare and Social Security. Can you guarantee that those cuts won't be made?
Well, what I would guarantee is that if we make reforms, and we do need to make reforms to make entitlement programs sustainable, that those are going to be reforms that might, for example, say lessen the rate of growth in some of those programs over time. But one of the ways that you deal with the deficit and the debt is you get a faster growing economy. And we've got a really sluggish economy. If we get the economy growing at even 2.5% as opposed to 1.5 to 2, which is what we've seen for the last decade, then you're going to get more government revenue. For every 1 percentage point increase in GDP, it generates about $3 trillion in additional revenue over a decade. So one of the ways to deal with the problem that Bernie's identified is, yes, we've got to restrain spending, but we got to get faster growth, and you accomplish that by reforming our tax code and making this an attractive place.
Can we just turn to the resignation of Al Franken yesterday? He said it's not, the irony is not lost on him that the man who was bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault now sits in the Oval Office. What do you say to that now that it looks like Roy Moore might be coming to Senate?
Well, I mean, I think there are men across all kinds of different industries that are learning that there are consequences to bad behavior, and I think that's a good thing. You know, what happened yesterday is unfortunate in the Senate, but I think on Capitol Hill, the discussion that we're having right now is long overdue.
Yes.
And I think what it points out is that action is needed. You know, we can't continue to accept the status quo there or anywhere else for that matter.
You had called for Roy Moore to step aside. That clearly is not the case. What will you all do if he's elected? Well,
I think the one thing I've said all along is if he comes to Washington, he'll immediately be under an ethics cloud, probably an ethics investigation, the result of which could be recommending expulsion, could be recommending censure. There are different things that the ethics committee can conclude. But it's a huge distraction. I mean, the simplest, wisest thing for him to do in the best interest of the country and our party is to step aside and allow another Republican to get into that race, because I think we would win the seat.
And yet the RNCs are supporting him.
Yeah.
Well, and that's unfortunate. I don't condone that. I think they made the right move in the first place.